Thank you very much. Good morning to the summit, or is it good afternoon? Because from Nairobi, it's good afternoon, but I hear in Ghana, you're just waking up. I love how digital transformation allows us in different corners of the world at different time zones to easily converge. That's the beauty of digital transformation. However, it has its dangers, as Martin and Jerry have stated. So I'm going to jump right into my presentation. Obviously, as a lawyer, I have to give a disclaimer that all the images used, I do not intend to infringe on any copyright, and they've been acknowledged. So let's jump right into it. What's the threat posed by cyber attacks to Africa? As of August this year, according to the Forbes Technology Council, there were more than 600 million internet users in Africa. And you've heard from what Jerry and Sam have said, how we're being attacked, especially the NGO world. So it just shows you that our threat landscape in Africa is very, very wide. And this is actually more than the total number of internet users in North America, South America, and the Middle East. The last 2 decades have witnessed increased technology adoption in Africa, and this in turn has enhanced our cybersecurity risk profile on the continent. While cybersecurity risks are not just an African concern, they're a global concern. However, as I think either Jerry or Martin mentioned, COVID enhanced our cybersecurity risk profile. And this is because the internet desperados, the cyber criminals, they turned their attention to Africa as we have less robust systems and infrastructure and low to non-existent cyber hygiene awareness. And this makes us easier prey for these cyber criminals than the more developed nations with more robust systems. In fact, the number of cyber threats targeting organizations in Africa is higher than the rest of the world. As at August this year, it was reported there was an average of 1,848 cyber attacks per week targeting a single organization in Africa compared to the global average of 1,164. So like I said, cybercrime is not just an African issue, it's a global issue. And in fact, it's predicted that on the global stage, cybercrime costs will grow by 15% per year over the next 5 years to reach a total of 10.5 trillion US dollars annually by 2025, which is up from the US dollar, from 3 trillion US dollars in 2015. And this cybercrime represents, the cost of cybercrime represents the greatest transfer of economic wealth in history. And remember, Africa is being hit harder than the rest of the world. So a lot of our economic wealth is now going to go to criminals unless we secure our cyberspace and enhance our cybersecurity risk profile. It also risks the incentives for innovation and investment. Nobody's going to invest in a place where we're prone to cyber attacks. If you're a nonprofit, donors are going to shy away from you. It's actually exponentially larger than the damage inflicted from national disasters in the year. And it will be more profitable than the global trade on illicit drugs. And we know drug trade on the global stage is colossal. If cybercrime was to be deemed a country, and last year the world actually experienced $6 trillion of damage from cybercrime, it would be the world's 3rd largest economy after the US and China. That's how huge the cost of cybercrime is. And I keep on re-emphasizing, Africa is being hit more than the rest of the world. So we're suffering more. So what's the cost of cybercrime in Africa? On the African continent, we're losing $4 billion annually to cybercrime, which is actually more than the individual GDP of 12 African countries. And for some of these 12 African countries, it's even more than double their GDP. That's a lot of money. And what is even more alarming is that according to a recent Interpol report, which came out last year, 90% of African businesses are operating without the necessary cybersecurity protocols and therefore are exposed to cyber attacks. I'm going to pose a question to you, which I want you to answer in your head and keep in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. How many of your nonprofits attending this summit have in place for their organizations a cybersecurity strategy, a cyber resilience strategy, a cyber incident response plan, which you train on regularly? How many of you train your staff regularly on the best cyber hygiene practices? I'm sure the answer is that many of your organizations do not have these in place, and it is imperative that you do, as cybersecurity, as cyber criminals view nonprofits as low risk but high reward targets. And I will briefly outline what each of these 4 items are later in my talk. Before I get into what those 4 items are, I want to just, and I know Jerry touched on this, why are nonprofits high reward targets for cyber criminals? Although a nonprofit business itself may not hold large reserves of cash that cyber criminals seek, what they do have is information, and plenty of it. Nonprofits are appealing targets primarily for their financial data. Donation or fundraising portals that lack adequate security are a prime source for sensitive bank and credit card information. In the same vein, those who rely on flimsy third-party payment systems also leave their data vulnerable to hackers. Additionally, nonprofits hold plenty of critical clients, donor, volunteers, and support staff information, from names, identification numbers, phone numbers, addresses, health records. The list is endless. And this provides yet another incentive for cyber criminals to breach their systems, as such data can be used for fraud, for extortion, or other related crimes. Many nonprofits, and maybe many of you, think that you're not at risk of being a target because you're not large enough. But your small size is one of the factors that makes you more appealing to cyber criminals. This is because, unlike large corporations, nonprofits, including schools, usually have fewer IT staff and resources. As Jerry mentioned, it's also expensive for them to embrace this, making them particularly vulnerable to cyber attacks. IT staff at nonprofits frequently juggle several responsibilities, which means they have less time to focus on cybersecurity. And yet, cyber criminals are relentlessly focused on finding their way into your computer systems. In fact, on the global average, a cyber attack happens every 39 seconds. As Jerry told us, we have 6 attacks every 3 or 4 minutes. And so they're looking for these vulnerabilities in your systems to circumvent the established safeguards, or by using social engineering to your staff members to get them to disclose sensitive information. And I'm not going to go into the nuances of social engineering, albeit it's one of the most common ways cyber criminals will get access to your systems. As later today, I've seen on the schedule that another presenter will do a deeper dive into this topic. So we now know that nonprofits are vulnerable. What's a negative impact? Why should you secure yourself? So you're vulnerable. What's a big deal? For example, if you're a nonprofit that deals with humanitarian issues, which many of our nonprofits on the continent do, you're heavily dependent on mobile and digital technology. We were talking before the session began with Martin about how Kenya and Ghana lead in fintech innovation. And many of the African countries have embraced mobile and digital technology to coordinate and fulfill their missions. Many times the environment they operate in has limited or unreliable infrastructure, thus enhancing their threat landscape. For perspective, currently, as part of the ongoing Horn of Africa drought response, as at July this year, USAID, which is just one of the donor agencies, contribution stood at $1.8 trillion. And of course, they're sending out these funds to get to the people who need them most through very many nonprofits. Now, remember, these areas where the people in need require access to these resources, or what these resources are going to acquire for them, may have limited and unreliable infrastructure, which makes it easier for the cyber criminals who have no morals to steal from even the most vulnerable and desperate in need of help. In January this year, the International Red Cross experienced a targeted cyber attack that disrupted the data relating to its Restoring Family Links program. This caused severe disruption to 60 national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, even here in Africa, and their capacity to deliver on this program that responds to one of the most basic humanitarian needs: restoring contact between families separated by armed conflict, violence, migration, and other forms of displacement. In Kenya, in the 17 months preceding March last year, savings and credit cooperative societies, as we call them SACCOs in Kenya, lost 106 million shillings to cyber criminals. And so measures have and are being put in place to enhance cybersecurity awareness in the sector to curb this vice. Kind of like what this webinar today is doing, is trying to enhance your capacity to know why you need to be aware. This is because many of these SACCOs or cooperatives or even microfinance organizations hold billions of shillings or dollars in deposits. And as here in Kenya, we have a very high mobile money penetration, albeit very low cyber hygiene awareness amongst most of our population. And this cyber hygiene low awareness is not a unique scenario to Kenya, it's across the continent and indeed the global stage. And this makes us easy targets for cyber criminals. Additionally, 50% of nonprofits do not do due diligence on software vendors. Jerry spoke about how sometimes you can outsource your cybersecurity work to a third-party vendor because sometimes it's cheaper to do that than to set this up for yourself. But unless you do due diligence, proper due diligence, these third-party vendors could have vulnerabilities. And so the cyber criminals could piggyback on their software to get access to your systems and attack your organization. And therefore, it's really imperative that you do really stringent due diligence on any third-party vendors that you work with. So just to sum up this topic on the negative impact, I'm going to tell you the reason why cyber attacks are really prevalent against nonprofits, why you're deemed low risk, high rewards, and why cyber criminals target you, is because they do this with a view to either disrupt your ability to carry out your activities. These guys have no morals. Access the data held on beneficiaries and other stakeholders. As we've realized, data is the new oil, it's the new gold. With this data, they can extort you, they can commit all sorts of other frauds. They're going to steal funds. You've got a lot of donor funds coming into you. On the global average, I think is 30 billion US dollars are going to donor funds into some of these nonprofits. They want to steal that money. Cyber criminals are about easy pickings like all other criminals. They want to spread malicious information and politically motivated messages. For example, misusing identities. We know in Africa and across the world, especially during election and campaign systems, how misinformation from politicians can cause strife across the continent and across the electorate. And they also want to manipulate some of that stolen data for some of these disinformation campaigns they want to do, whether they're politically motivated or to stop us from taking vaccines with malicious and disinformation campaigns. At the end of the day, they will negatively impact the goodwill of your organization. And if you're deemed as an organization that's highly vulnerable to cyber attacks, then goodwill, which is hard to earn, but is very easy to lose, will mean that donors will stop working with you. So it will also hit your bottom line as an organization. Okay. So maybe you're still thinking that your nonprofit does not qualify to get on the radar of cyber criminals. You still think you're too small, or, I mean, there's so many out there, they're not going to find me. Let me give you 3 reasons why, if your nonprofit engages in any of these 3 activities, it's time to get serious about taking steps to address cybersecurity risks. Do you, 1, conduct e-commerce on your website, such as processing donations or event registrations, like what's happened for today's event? 2, do you store, transfer, such as sending to the cloud, personal identifiable information about anyone, including donors? Common examples of personal identifiable information, PII, includes employee records, medical information, identification documents, addresses. Thirdly, do you collect information on preferences and habits of donors, patrons, and newsletter subscribers, etc.? If so, then there's a real risk to your nonprofit's own data security, as well as to its donors and the individuals it serves. And if your system is breached, there's also legal repercussions if you have data protection acts applicable in your jurisdiction, or if your donors are liable to data protection acts in their jurisdictions. For example, EU donors who have the strictest data protection act in the world, the GDPR. So hopefully now more of you have realized that you need to enhance your organization's cybersecurity profile. So I'm now going to briefly discuss the 4 items that I stated earlier that your organization should have: a cybersecurity strategy, a cyber resilience strategy, a cyber incident response plan, and the need to train your staff on the best cyber hygiene practices. So what's the difference between a cybersecurity and a cyber resilience strategy? They're very related, but very separate. Back in the day, we used to tell people just develop a cybersecurity strategy. But with the increase in cyber attacks, we've now realized there is a need for organizations to also develop a cyber resilience strategy. So basically, a cybersecurity strategy is defined as procedures followed or measures taken to ensure the safety of your organization. Its purpose is to reduce the risk of cyber attacks and protect your organization from cyber theft and espionage. A cyber resilience strategy is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from the difficulties you will experience when you have a cyber attack. It makes your organization resilient. So its purpose is to ensure business continuity on a wider scope, comprising both cybersecurity and your business requirements. The technologies and the processes that a cybersecurity strategy deals with are designed to protect your organization from this cyber crime that we're saying happens every 39 seconds. So it's not a matter of if you're going to be attacked, but more when you're going to be attacked. So when you're going to be attacked, you want to be resilient. And this is why the technologies and the processes for a cyber resilience strategy are designed to keep your organization delivering its intended services in spite of a cyber incident. You don't want to come to a crashing halt. You want to be resilient and have business continuity as you try and resolve this attack. Now, the effect of a cybersecurity strategy on your organization is that it works effectively without compromising the usability of other systems. However, the effect of a cyber resilience strategy on your organization is that it requires an organization-wide culture shift. You have to become security-centric mindset, and it has to become normalized, and you have to embed the best cybersecurity best practices, which I'm going to touch on when I talk about cyber hygiene. And finally, a cybersecurity strategy includes a business plan to resume operations in the event of a successful attack. Because just because you're attacked, if you're ready and you're monitoring what's happened, these cyber criminals are not always successful. But there will be a time, unfortunately, when they may be successful, and you need to ensure you have a plan to ensure business continuity. Finally, the resilience strategy. This one requires your organization to become agile and adaptable in the face of cyber attacks and incidents, because the threat landscape changes every day. So you have to be able to adapt to the new nuances as and when they arise. Now, if you're wondering, okay, we've talked about this cybersecurity strategy and this cyber resilience strategies. How does your organization develop them? There are 2 main frameworks that are used on the global stage. One is the ISO framework, which is a European-based framework, and the other is the NIST framework. The beauty is, if you go online and Google these 2 frameworks, you'll be able to download them, and they take you step by step on how your organization can set up its own cybersecurity strategy. The ISO framework, the difference is that the ISO framework, which is more European based, it can be externally assessed and you can get a certificate of compliance. Whereas the NIST framework is more of a voluntary framework. Additionally, the ISO framework, which most organizations in Kenya use, it can be integrated with several other standards and frameworks, including NIST. So I'm not going to go into the deep nuances of these frameworks to save on time, but you can go online, just Google ISO and NIST, and the frameworks will come. Please use them to help your organization develop your strategy. Now, there are three things you need to do when you're trying to enhance the cybersecurity profile of your organization. You need to plan, prevent, and ensure. When it comes to planning, I'm going to run through about 10 steps that your organization needs to do. The first step is that you need to educate the board of directors and the senior management, kind of like what's happening here today. They need to understand why do we need to enhance our cybersecurity risk profile? It's going to affect our business continuity. It's going to affect our bottom line, our financial statements. And cybersecurity is very, very expensive. The technology is expensive. The training, capacity building is expensive. So when the ICT department, the CIO comes in to ask for an increased budget for cybersecurity, the decision makers in the organization now appreciate why they need to approve these budgets. And this ties into the second step. You need to identify your critical infrastructure. Ideally, we would want to secure everything in our organizations. However, as I mentioned, cybersecurity is very expensive. So the two frameworks I talked about, ISO and NIST, guide you on how you identify your mission critical infrastructure. What is the stuff that, if it was hit, would bring your organization to a standstill? Secure that first, and then trickle down to all the less mission critical. Eventually, you will secure everything within your organization. Step 3 is to develop an actionable cyber incident plan. This is part of your cyber resilience plan. So an actionable cyber incident plan is the equivalent of a fire drill. If right now a fire drill went off wherever you are, you all know you have to evacuate the building, you don't use a lift, you assemble at a designated area. An actionable cyber incident plan is what your organization will do when you're hit, not if, because remember, a cyber attack happens every 39 seconds. So when you hit, does everybody know what they're meant to do, how they're meant to do, who they're meant to contact? Because attribution in cyberspace is very problematic. And the trail in cyberspace goes cold very fast in the blink of an eye. So you don't want to run around like headless chicken, so to speak. When you're attacked, you want to be able to act quickly. So you need to train your staff on this on a regular basis, ideally on a monthly basis, until it becomes second nature. This is why when I talked about the cyber resilience plan, I said it has to be embedded in your organization's culture. The fourth and the fifth steps are related. You need to develop in-house daily mandatory cybersecurity policies and establish basic cybersecurity procedures, which you train your staff on. The sixth step is to acquire the appropriate cybersecurity technology and services. And this is why the first step was training and informing the management, the senior management, the decision makers on why your organization needs cybersecurity. So when you bring these huge budgets to them, they're able to approve them easily and readily so that you can commence securing your organization. The seventh step is to ensure applicable authorization is in place to facilitate network monitoring. Most of us now have data protection laws in place, which require a data subject's consent. So when you're training your staff on cybersecurity best practices, cybersecurity procedures, you should then get them to sign a legal authorization just to protect your organization from litigation that informs them that you will be monitoring the organization's network for a cybersecurity purpose. And a cybersecurity purpose means for the purpose of protecting an information system or information that is stored or processed or transiting on the organization's information system from a cybersecurity threat or security vulnerability. So you're not infringing on their personal privacy, you're just securing the cybersecurity risk profile of your organization. And this kind of ties in with the 8th point, which is ensure your legal counsel is conversant with cybersecurity and cyber incident management. I am one of the only formally trained cybersecurity lawyers on the African continent and indeed on the global stage, because it's a relatively brand new area of law. However, there are many law firms out there who are conversant with technology law. So ensure that the law firm who your organization works with has a lawyer who understands the nuances of technology law, because in case of a breach, there are legal requirements on how soon you should report that breach to, for example, your National Data Commissioner, how soon you should inform the data subject, the persons whose data has been breached, that their information has been breached. And if you don't comply with these legal requirements, you're going to incur penalties. So it's always important to have a lawyer who is tech savvy. And even if your in-house lawyer is not, you can always outsource a law firm that is legally tech savvy. Related to this is, especially if you're a larger nonprofit, you need to have a PR team that is conversant with crisis management, who have developed a cybersecurity crisis management response plan, which is part of your strategy and resilient and incident response plans. Because, for example, if you're a SACCO or a cooperative and word goes out that there was a breach in your systems, there could be a run on deposits. So you need to have a PR team who can mitigate that run on deposits and be able to spin the story to assure the public that your organization is still up and running despite the news of the attack. Most importantly is that cybersecurity is a multi-stakeholder approach. You can't secure this on your own, so you need to work with other partners. Within your national jurisdictions, I'm sure you have national CERTs, who are National Computer Incident Response Teams. I know on today's program, we've got the head of the Ghanaian National CERT coming to talk to you later today. Develop a relationship with them, because they have a lot of information and they share a lot of information with people on how best to secure yourself. They alert you on the type of breaches happening within your jurisdiction. In Kenya, we have our CASERT. We also have our Director of Criminal Investigations. They have a digital forensics lab. And remember, I said in cyberspace, attribution, being able to trace the trail of a cyber criminal is very problematic. So you need people who are trained, who are able to do that. Maybe you have private, fully fledged incident response teams who your organization can engage with to help you trace these cyber criminals when they attack your systems. So it's really important to establish these relationships way before you're attacked, so that when you're attacked, everything is up and running. So now you've done all the planning. Everything is ready. Your strategies are ready, your plans, everything is done. How do you prevent the attack? 95% of cyber breaches are due to the human factor. And remember, a cyber attack happens every 39 seconds. So you need to enhance cybersecurity capacity enhancement, kind of like what this webinar today is doing. You need to enhance the cyber hygiene awareness of your staff, which I'm going to delve in just now. So I talked about plan, prevent, and ensure. Cyber insurance is a very important cyber resilience tool. If you have a car, chances are you have a car motor insurance. So in case somebody hits you, your insurance company will cover the repairs. It's the same thing with cyber insurance. And what many organizations do not realize is that their general liability insurance covers do not cover cyber attacks. So you need to get a specific cyber insurance cover from your insurance company. And the reason why cyber insurance is important, as Jerry and Martin mentioned, one of the frequent ways cyber attacks happen is through ransomware attacks, where they get onto your system, the cyber criminals get access to your system and lock you out of your system. And then you have to pay them a ransom. And normally they ask for this ransom in cryptocurrency because it's harder to trace cryptocurrency. And unless you pay them that ransom, you have no way of getting back onto your system unless you have a fantastic cybersecurity and cyber resilience system where you have a backup system not connected to your main system, and so you can ensure business continuity. But if somebody comes and asks you, somebody knocks my car, I am not going to pay them a ransom because I know my insurance company is going to pay me. If you have a cyber insurance, you're less likely to pay this ransom. And if we can all stop paying this ransom, then these cyber criminals will not find this as a lucrative way of attacking us and will move on to invent another form of attacking us as criminals do. However, cyber insurance is very expensive. On the global average, the annual cost of a breach is, I think this year is about $2.35 million. So even here in Kenya, the reinsurance industry is beginning to say that they can't afford the cost of cyber insurance. And now if the reinsurers cannot insure the insurance companies, then these insurance companies cannot sell the cyber insurance products to us, the end user. So in Kenya and indeed around the world, we may have to go the way the US did after the 9/11 terrorism attack, when terrorism insurance skyrocketed and the reinsurers could not afford it. And so the US government passed what they call the TRIA, which is the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, where the government became a reinsurer to the terrorism insurance industry. So governments may have to become reinsurers to the cyber insurance industry moving forward as a way to ensure that people can get access to this really important cyber resilience tool, which will stop them from paying ransomware and stop these cyber criminals from attacking us in that format. Okay, finally, as I wind up, I know my time has run over, just give me like 3 more minutes, please. I want to talk on the last thing. We now know what a cybersecurity strategy is. We know what cyber resilience strategy is. We know about cyber incident response plan. The fourth thing I had mentioned was enhancing cyber hygiene awareness. When COVID hit, we all learned to mask up or to wash our hands and to sanitize to avoid ourselves from getting the virus. Cyber hygiene is really, really important, and it's basically the best practices that you utilize every time you go online to protect yourself and your information from cyber attacks. And this is really important because, like I mentioned earlier, 95% of cyber breaches are due to the human factor, be it accidental or malicious, and a cyber attack happens every 39 seconds. So you need to secure yourself. So what are these cyber hygiene best practices? The list I'm going to give, I'm going to give you about 10 or 11 points. It's not exhaustive, but it's a good starting point. You need to secure your organization's endpoint security, where people get access to your organization. If you're sending sensitive files, you need to ensure they're encrypted. The best way to describe encryption is most of us use a WhatsApp service. On WhatsApp, you see that the message is end-to-end encrypted. It means if I send a message from my device to your device, as it goes through cyberspace, it's turned into a code, but until it hits your device and gets what we call a decryption key, nobody can intercept that message and read it. So ensure that all sensitive information, especially dealing with donors and your finances and the personal information that you contain, is encrypted as you send it. Use what we call multi-factor authentication. It means when you're accessing your organization systems, have more than one step, not just an email, maybe an email and an SMS alert to ensure that you have more than one step of getting to your system, because the more authentications you have, the less likely the less opportunities you're giving a cyber criminal to get access to your systems. Also, when you're not working on your computer, shut down and time out your work laptops when they're not in use, to ensure that somebody who doesn't have authorization to see the information on your device does not access it. I know during COVID, I don't know, in Kenya these days, you find many people working in coffee shops. And this is it's a perfect segue to my next thing. Be careful. We have something called shoulder surfing, where somebody sitting at the table behind you could be looking at your device and maybe taking screenshots of what you have, your organization's information unbeknownst to you. This is why when it comes to matters cybersecurity, you have to adopt the security-centric mindset. Another thing that has to do with these coffee shops and remote working and being on the move is free Wi-Fi. Everybody loves something free, especially in these harsh economic times that we're all going through. However, free Wi-Fi is where all the cyber criminals prowl. So if you're accessing free Wi-Fi, never use it to send sensitive organizational information or even sensitive personal information. If you must use free Wi-Fi, then use what we call a VPN, a virtual private network, which secures your device on these unsecured networks. Alternatively, use a data bundle. Okay, as I wind up. The other thing is that if you're having a meeting, we all love IoT devices, Internet of Things, smart devices, your Alexa, your Siri, your smartwatch. But you remember that phrase, Big Brother is always watching? It's actually true. IoT has its advantages, its conveniences, but they're also easy portals for cyber criminals to listen into sensitive conversations. So if you're having sensitive conversations that pertain to your organization, ensure all smart devices are switched off. There's a classic example I give of a huge casino in Las Vegas that was hacked and millions of dollars were stolen from them. The cyber criminals got through a smart thermometer in a fish tank. So be very, very careful of smart devices when you're discussing sensitive organizational information. Also, don't mix your work and personal devices or download apps or games on your work devices, because unbeknownst to you, when you download these apps or games, there could be malware. Malware is a virus that comes onto your phone, or your device, your computer device, your laptop, your desktop, which will hang around there. When you plug onto the organization's network, will give the cyber criminal access to the organization systems. So always separate the two devices. Be careful what kind of apps you're uploading. Try and read reviews to see if they're legitimate apps before you upload them. If you're on social media and you're seeing sensational headlines, we call them clickbaits, where it says, woman puts head in lion's mouth. I mean, that's really sensational, but you want to click on it and it sends you to many other links. You have, chances are, unbeknownst to you, uploaded malware onto your device. We call that clickbaiting. So be very careful and separate what you do for your social work away from the devices you use for work. And finally, the last 2 points I'm going to talk about today have to do with adopting a zero trust approach across your organization. And this zero trust approach involves, one, restricting privileges. Limit the number of people who have administrative privileges that allow them to make changes to your organization systems or to access different parts of your organization systems. Because the more people have access to this ability, remember, 95% of cyber breaches are due to the human factor, be it accidental or malicious, the greater the chance the cyber criminal has of obtaining this sensitive information. If you're an organization that deals with money, try and verbally validate payment instructions. I mean, it's always best to pick up the phone and communicate with the relevant parties to confirm payment requests if they sound out of the ordinary. It's better to be safe than sorry. It's also important that senior management reminds staff to call clients directly on a known phone number to confirm a financial transaction or an out-of-pattern data request. So in conclusion, remember cybersecurity, to develop your cybersecurity strategy, your cyber resilience strategy. develop an actionable cyber incident response plan, train your staff on the best cyber hygiene processes, because cybersecurity is in all our hands. And if you don't have a plan, the best time to have developed a plan was yesterday, but the next best time is today. Start today. Look for the NIST and the ISO frameworks. And if you need assistance or would like my consultancy services, my LinkedIn profile is up there. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention. I'm sorry, Jerry, I overran, but you know, it was African time. You can say that this is an African summit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mutheu. That was really insightful. I mean, I've been in the space for a while, but I've learned so much. The key lesson for me is not to mix my work machines with my personal devices. You know, sometimes some of these devices you download on one device and then automatically it goes onto the other one, especially with Apple devices. So I think we all need to, you know, be careful on that so that, you know, we don't fall victims to malware. Before I will ask my question, I think I would like to tell the audience that if you have any question, I've seen 2 hands raised. If you have any questions, you can raise your hands or you can type it in the chat, and I'm sure Mutheu will be happy to respond to it. But my key question I noted is that, you know, non-profits, our revenue streams are usually, majority of our revenue stream comes from our donors. And with the things that you've listed, I mean, especially we have to plan, we have to prepare, we have to ensure, all has cost implications. You even mentioned that we need to have lawyers on board, you know, just in case that there are any breaches that we need the legal support and all of that. And if you're having a PR team, I don't know how many civil society or NGOs have a PR team who are able to do quick cybersecurity plans and do some firefighting when, you know, they are hacked and all of that. So how do nonprofits justify having a budget to cater for all of this, and then, you know, justify it with their donors that this is important and for them to take it up? Is there any advice that you have for us in that?
Yes, I will. You know, in fact, you've mentioned a really important fact that a lot of your revenue comes from donors. So donors these days, because the global economy is very interconnected, and like we know, cybersecurity is a global phenomenon. Donors these are also aware of the cyber risks. And because Africa is being hardest hit by cybersecurity, donors are less likely to give funds to an organization who does not have proper cybersecurity profiles, strategies, resilience plans. Normally, when they're coming to give you the donations now, they're going to say, what's your cybersecurity risk profile? If you go, what's that? They're going to be like, okay, moving swiftly along, because they don't want to give their money to a place where they know it's not going to have the intended use that they want it to be used for, but it's going to go into the pockets of a cyber criminal. So some of these things are things, and that's why for many of the nonprofits who don't have those budgets to set this up, I was like, go online, you know, instead of trying to engage somebody to set this up for you, go online, look for the ISO framework, download it, you know. So I always say Google is your friend. I know I'm a Google Women Tech Maker ambassador, so let me plug Google in here. Go online, download your ISO framework if you're dealing with European partners, because they want you to comply with that, because you can get a certificate of compliance from that. If you're dealing with more US donors, then download the NIST framework and develop a strategy around that. It actually takes you read through those documents and download them. They take you through what you want to do. Then have a cybersecurity strategy and resilience plan. Cyber hygiene awareness. It's about training your staff on these best practices, you know, show that you have done trainings to your staff. Call Mutheu, call Jerry, call Martin to come and talk to your staff on the best practices that they can do. Develop a criteria which your staff do on a regular basis. When the donors ask, you can say, hey, last week, we were at the Pen Plus Bytes training, you know, on cyber hygiene awareness. Our staff are aware. They're seeing you're making a concerted effort. The cost implications for a lawyer, many nonprofits cannot have that in-house lawyer, but all around Africa, we have law firms who we can engage external services. So what do? You go and you find out in Ghana, who are the best technology service law firms out there? Identify them. Don't just sit back and wait for the problem to happen. Identify them and know Jerry's law firm is very good in tech. Make a call to Jerry. Jerry, if I had a problem, would you people be able to advise me? And how fast can you act? You have made the step of engaging with them. When the donor comes to ask you, do you have a law firm? You're able to say, yes, in fact, I had spoken to Jerry's law firm. If we need them, we'll be able to guide us to ensure that we adhere to the different laws. The other thing, if you don't want to pay the cost to a lawyer, you have a national data commissioner. Their office has a website where they have FAQs, frequently asked questions, about what you need to comply with the local data protection laws. Go to that website and read the information and ensure your organization is compliant. Go to your national cert. Your national cert will put the best policies out. And like in Kenya, our national cert puts links to some of these links to how you can develop your frameworks. You know, you can download those links and get information. So a lot of this you can do in-house, especially if you're smaller. However, the bigger you become, and this is now where the PR firms come in. If you're a bigger nonprofit, then there's more likely to be a larger impact, or a bigger SACCO, a bigger cooperative society. Then it's good to have a PR firm or even somebody in your organization as part of that cyber incident response plan who you've assigned. Mutheu is very good at talking to the public and calming people down. In case we have a cyber breach, she will be our organization spokesperson to assure the public that everything is under control, because it's all about trust. When you're attacked, the trust deficit is totally lost. And you want to ensure that the public, the people you deal with, still have that trust in you. So there are ways around it. It's expensive, but there are ways to circumvent it. I hope that answers.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's really, I've taken so much notes. Next time I'm doing a proposal around cybersecurity, I'll definitely will touch base with you. So, I mean, I think our time is due for the next speaker, but I have one more question. Do you have any cost-effective mechanisms for nonprofits when it comes to cybersecurity? Is there any way we can reduce beyond making Google your friend? You know, what is the easiest way, most cost-effective way that nonprofits can adopt when it comes to, you know, securing themselves online?
Well, you know, at the end of the day, you have to develop these strategies. So it's, I mean, there's no way out. It's not an optional thing. You can't say, to make it cheaper for you, don't develop a strategy, don't develop a cyber resilience plan. We've seen Africa is being hardest hit. You know, on the continent, we're having an organization in Africa being hit 1,848 times per week. And those are the known figures. And most of these reports go unreported, you know, so those are not even our true threat landscape. So there is no easy way out of this. You have to develop those strategies. You have to develop those resilience plans. You have to train your staff, because like we've said, cybercrime has escalated to the point that it's actually the world's third largest economy. You know, it's third after the US and China. I mean, it's colossal. It's more than the GDP of 12 African nations. So it shows you the impact is colossal and we're being hit hard. So there's no shortcuts to this. Googling or going online to try and get free resources, and there are loads of free resources online, is the cheapest option. But the bigger your organization becomes, the larger your threat landscape becomes. And the larger your nonprofit is, then you have to look for the professional advice, because the impact to your organization will be harder.
Thank you so much, Mutheu. Thank you. I have 2 hands raised. Uchechi actually raised his hands, or raised their hands right from the beginning. So let me find out if they still have a question. Uchechi, are you on to ask a question? If not, then I can quickly go to Wisdom. Wisdom Letu. You have your hands raised. Do you have a question? You can unmute your mic and ask your question. Okay, you see Osman. Okay, Wisdom is on. So Wisdom, can you ask your question?
I don't think we can hear them, but what I was just going to tell you is that, you know, when you
Okay, so I think there's a question that came about how can we get a slides presentation? So we'll request for the slides afterwards and we'll share it. So okay. That's a question in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, so you're going to say something, Mutheu, please.
I was just going to say that the next presenter originally is from your country, yeah. Dr. Bright. Yes, but we in Kenya have adopted him. Bright, if you can hear me, your hours.
We are taking him back.
Anyways, the question, we've taken him, we're claiming him. He's a Pan-African, he belongs to all of us. But Bright's presentation, Bright, you see how I'm claiming you, even in your homeland. But Bright's presentation is going to answer one of your questions, Jerry. You know, yeah. You said, how can these nonprofits get away without developing these cybersecurity strategies, these cyber resilience strategies, or training their people? Bright can hack your system in 2 seconds flat. He's what we call an ethical hacker. So you want to secure yourself from the bad version of him.
That's scary. That's scary.
And I'm sure he's going to scare you all in your presentation, and you're going to download these frameworks and develop all these strategies. So yeah, so I wish you all the best.